Did everyone do their homework? Nope. All right. Nope. Ooh, that worked.
We have somebody looking at a clock. Are you thinking we're early?
Nebraska. All right.
Okay.
So good morning again, and I am still Suzanne Weeks since last you saw me. And so what we're doing in this room is going to talk about the workforce landscape, and we'll do a panel as we did before, and then we'll have time for questions. Can I see what states are in the house? Alabama, Nebraska, Georgia, Iowa, pardon me? Arkansas, Maryland, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Tennessee, California. What is it? What state? Idaho. Great. Ohio. Wonderful. And one from Massachusetts. Very good. So this is about workforce landscape, and our intention is to, so we're all involved in educating students in mathematics, and we're doing this because mathematics is useful, mathematics is beautiful, but hopefully our students will eventually become contributing members of our, our society and help support me when I retire through Social Security contributions, et cetera. So we want to see what the workforce landscape is like, and how that may inform or how that may influence what we are teaching, what we're doing. It's just good to know. But still, can I get, maybe I'll ask 3 people to hear what you may want to get out of this session. Anybody? Yes, sir? At this table here? Uh-huh. Oh, I see. Okay.
So, hopefully that's what I can get. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes. You're not from Oklahoma. You're from, were you from, what state were you from?
I'm from IBM, from Cambridge, Mass.
Okay.
So I'm interested in how we can make our professions more representative in terms of women, people of color.
Okay. So more equity and diversity in our professions. Okay, good. Yes, ma'am?
Perhaps a discussion about how the workforce landscape connects to the education, because what I'm seeing is that really workforce could control higher ed coming straight out of high school, and what is the definition for workforce? Are we considering that it's coming straight out of high school?
Okay.
Or are we considering that it's coming out of higher, because we're, as we said earlier, we're getting muddy waters here between secondary and college, which is fine, but I want to hear what everyone's thoughts are about that.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. One more. Thank you. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you.
So we have what's called the Analytics Leadership Council in Iowa, which is about 50, 55 companies that get together every month and talk about issues that have to do with mathematics, with statistics, with their employees not really knowing what to do very often.
Okay.
And that have to do with the question. And what they want is they do not want a mathematician or a statistician. What they want is somebody who understands mathematical and statistical issues besides what else they do. And the else may be an accountant or an engineer or whatever else.
Okay.
So how can we integrate math and statistics and data science
Okay.
into the K-12 and also the post-K-12 curriculum in a way that actually companies get the kind of experience and expertise that they need in order to do their jobs.
Okay, good. So thank you very much. So of course, we've prepared slides already. Well, we thought it was good to have this discussion, and hopefully what we convey will address some of these questions, or at least we're all getting to start thinking about these things. So again, I am, still Suzanne Weeks. Rahcel Levy, you've met before, just again, half an hour ago, and Nick Horton. So I don't think I need to go through their details again. So here I am. So what I'm going to give is a perspective from partnerships. So, I want to end with almost like a concluding slide, okay? So I want to make sure that we all can convey that mathematics has impact. It's used to make real decisions. Mathematics plays a role in many, many disciplines. So I don't like to think of mathematics in isolation, and for me personally, I have fun working with other disciplines and solving problems coming up from elsewhere. So it's not mathematics in a silo by itself. And I believe that a strong mathematics and quantitative education provides a route for upward mobility. There are jobs. I haven't heard anyone say, yeah, not so much. There are jobs. So we certainly have a need. I think we believe this, and if not, we can discuss this in our when it's time for questions. We need workers with strong quantitative, analytical, problem-solving skills. We are living in an age where information is widely available. Class I just taught, we just finished last week. First day I said, Google it, right? You have a question, of course you can still talk to me, but information is out there. If you're not sure how a specific technique works, or you really don't, information is out there, right? We have access to lots of information. We have lots of data. Nick had said that earlier. We have data galore, and we're giving data. Everybody knows where we all are. They know that there are a bunch of people in this room, in this hotel. The data is out there, so we can do a lot of work with data. And we have access to good computing. We may not all have a parallel computer or supercomputer in our buildings, but we have access to good computing, phones, laptops, et cetera. So as I said, my perspective on the workforce comes from all the partnering I've done with industry. WPI, we're a private university focused on science, technology, engineering, and business. And every WPI undergraduate has to do a research project in their major area. All the students have to do this in order to graduate. It takes up about 1/3 of the work they do in their senior year. So that's one thing. And in about more than 20 years ago, my colleagues started what's called the Center for Industrial Math and Statistics. Basically, it's a group of faculty who are interested in engaging with industry, meaning business, industry, government, anything outside of our math department, and working on problems that come from outside and providing connections between academia and industry, okay? And this connection, and it's for our mathematical sciences community, not just our WPI math department, but we've done workshops and we've done work with teachers and all the way from middle school, high school, all the way up to PhD students. And one thing that we have done and we're very happy with is we've run a summer research experience for undergraduate that has been funded by the National Science Foundation and Department of Defense at times. We've brought in students, not just WPI students, we've brought in students from over 130 universities. I've stopped keeping track of things, over 200 students. They come and spend the summer with us, and they work on teams. Each team works on a project that's come directly from industry. So as I said, many, many projects, many, many companies we've worked with over the years, and so that's why I am standing in front of you, because that kind of makes me somewhat qualified, I would propose. The other program, Rahcel mentioned this morning, that I'm involved in is PIC Math, and it stands for Preparation for Industrial Careers in Mathematical Sciences, and it also says you should pick math, right? With PIC Math, we work with mathematical sciences faculty at university. We worked with some community college teachers, faculty, as well as university teachers, and basically, we're training them to do the kind of stuff that we've been doing at WPI, working on research projects with industry. So we have a summer workshop training, and the funding that we have from the National Science Foundation and the National Security Agency is for faculty to be able to run a course in the spring. So right now our faculty are finishing up. And in that course, what the students do is work with a company representative on a project that has come from them. That's what they do. In fact, Dr. Janitha Gray, who you'll hear speaking after lunch, she has been with us from the very beginning. She's featured on one of our videos. She gave a project to a couple of our teams over the years. So what sorts of projects? This is what I could tell you about the sort of projects. I think every project I have listed are titles. They're just titles. I'm not going into details, but what undergraduate students have worked on. So this is a team of our undergraduates, either through our summer research program or our WPI students. So this is a photo that I love, and you have to pay money to use this photo of my students because this appeared in our local newspaper. But it turns out, in order to use that photo, I actually have to pay $500 to have the license to use it. But so I'm going to use it wherever I can, whether it's relevant or not, because I pay good money. All right. So we've done research projects on mathematical finance. So this first one I can talk about a little bit, calibration of an optimal bidding model for the mobile advertisement markets, right? So why is that under mathematical finance? Okay. So what we're talking about here is, let's say, Facebook. You know when, at least for me, when I've Googled in one panel, I want to look for a washing machine, and then magically on Facebook we have those, how did you know I wanted a washing machine, right? And that's in your Facebook feed now? Well, okay, so the ad placements come through via a bidding process, right? And they bid, okay, I'm going to pay, there's not someone saying these things, but 1 cent, 2 cents, 3 cents, whatever, to place on there. That's similar to the sort of things that go on in a mathematical finance, right? I'm not going into the details because I don't know the details. Liquidity risk using exchange-traded funds, all these things you see, bond portfolios. I'm not going to talk about any of this. This is just evidence that we can do. With some good math knowledge, we can contribute to, let's say, mathematical sciences. We worked with Lehman Brothers, which actually does still exist. I thought they no longer exist, but they actually still exist. They just went bankrupt. And State Street Global Advisors, et cetera. And this is part of a microwave structure. So we've had students work on math modeling projects with related to microwaves, as I have a colleague whose focus is on this. And so, interesting. That video should be, sorry about that. Okay, that should have been an animation that's playing there, but nevertheless. So we've worked on math modeling of cancer cells, growth, geothermal energy harvesting systems, which basically is a sustainable way to provide heating and cooling to your homes. We've worked with NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric, agency, looking at fish species in the Northeast continental shelf. And as I've said, we've done a few questions about modeling microwaves and heating and uniformity of heating and things like that. So one of the projects was pre-mission flight plan optimization, okay? So can you see this just fine? So what this was a project with, Draper Laboratories, and they were working with NASA to see when, they would like to monitor when possibly there are going to be landslides. So they have drones or unmanned aerial vehicles would fly over sites. That would be the plan. And this project was about figuring out what the flight plan should be for a number of these drones, right? You want to minimize the time that they're flying, total amount of time, all these things, right? So as you see here, that home base is the depot, and you're going to launch several of these unmanned aerial vehicles, right? But I'm just putting a little fine bit of detail on this, because when you take out the bubbles and the pictures, you get a structure like this, okay? And so that leads you into I'm just saying, what happens when you start with this nicely posed problem about landslides? Yeah, we're going to help the world stop fatalities, get people evacuated in time by knowing how to monitor things. So you have this picture, you get to that picture, then inevitably you get into the field of graph theory, to have that study of graph theory. And then in order to solve the original picture, you have to talk about the traveling salesman problem. What is the quickest way, right, the least amount of distance to visit each one of those nodes in a single way? You have to get into traveling salesman problem, and then you continue your work in combinatorial optimization or operations research. Then you can talk about business logistics, all the different problems that come from that, about distributions, transportation, sales, logistic, and all these things, right? So for me, starting from a problem that I can understand, talk about a message that can, good PR, right? Talk about landslides, fatalities. I've caught your attention, right? How do you do that? And then you see how the math plays in, and then you can get a broader perspective and broader knowledge about math. And this is, by the way, just-in-time mathematics, because I gave a talk at the National Math Festival, and this is one of the things I talked about yesterday. And people asked a couple of questions, and I was fine saying, this is not my area of expertise. I know just enough to solve this problem, right? Which is okay. I can't be an expert on each thing, but I know each thing, but I can know enough to do positive damage, okay. And then we've done what we would classify as applied statistics projects. So analyzing exome sequencing data, that's some genetic stuff, to detect familial ALS, arthrolateral sclerosis, which is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And then we did some projects for Pfizer, glucose sensors, and that Alzheimer's disease clinical trial was also with Pfizer as well. And then a project with the National Institute of Health or something like that about body mass index. That's applied statistics projects. But the nice thing about these are all projects. They require some good mathematics and statistics, but at least we can have an elevator conversation and talk about what we're doing, and the impact of what we're doing is clear. And then over the years, these things that we called applied statistics projects started to change a little bit, started to be more probability, some linear algebra, all these things creeping in. And so then we have what we will now call data science projects. Before, we may not have called it but this is what they are. So, so our students just 3 weeks ago presented, some of our summer WPI students, and one project was performing binary classification of contest profitability for DraftKings. Does anybody know what DraftKings is? Tell me, anyone? Right, fantasy football, right? So online betting stuff. And then process mining, Credit Suisse advisory process, so that's a banking, predictive power of generalized preventive care segmentation model. Those are a lot of fancy words, but basically it's like we have our data, understand our data, how to make money given the data we have, and do things more efficiently. So the skills you need to do this sort of work. What are the mathematical skills you need? I think, at least at university, every student should know how to program in a language. I don't care what level of language, you should understand what an if-then statement is, what a loop is like, right? Some programming, some statistics, see some probability, some differential equations, linear algebra, modeling, numerical simulation, operations research. You don't have to know all, but those are some of the things that we see when we do these projects. Other skills. Communication skills. If you can't talk about what you just did, then you might as well have done nothing. It's not enough that only you understand what you're doing. You have to be able to communicate it. Yes, we do have to figure out how to work with on teams. So I did appreciate, was it Rahcel, you talked about a document that helps us figure out, we do have to work the team, and it's not so easy just to say, go work on a team. I know for sure my daughter is like, oh, another team project, I'm gonna have to do all the work. But how to make that work. Enthusiasm, self-direction, and ability to complete projects. And I must say, I usually like to make it clear that my best projects have not necessarily been done by A students, meaning straight A students, okay? So this is not about that, it's about the tenacity, interest, and all that willing to just investigate. So this is the McKinsey Global Institute report that was put out in June 2011. It's called Big Data, the Next Frontier for Innovation, Competition, and Productivity. And so this is a well-cited report, right? And what it says, and I have not read the whole thing, so I will not, I can't say these numbers are exactly correct, but look at the numbers, right? The United States alone faces a shortage of over 100,000 people to be working in analyzing data and all these things. So there is I believe there is a demand. We are creating more data. We do want to understand it. So, okay. And these are projects I got maybe 2 years ago for some of my PIC math faculty. And so I'm going to put this up here so you can actually read on your own. I'll be quiet for 20 seconds. So you can read what it means to be a data science project, what sort of questions they're asking. And then moving on. So one resource that we developed at WPI, with all the projects we've done over the years, about a decade ago or so, we did industrial math projects for high school students. So the website is there. So we took some of the projects that our undergraduates had worked on and kind of inspired by those, we brought projects down to the level that high schools and sometimes middle schoolers could work on. So these things here are already ready to go for high school and middle school educators to go to the website, download stuff, download this project. It actually says it. Download this project and have the students work on some modeling real modeling projects. They are mapped to NCTM standards, right? So again, this mapping was done maybe 10 years ago, but I don't think the standards have changed that much. But hopefully you can find this as a good resource. The website is the same one. It's on the second page. Here it is, up there. Can you see? Oh, the angle is horrible? Ooh. All right.
We've also have all the slides are going to be collated and made available to everybody.
Yes, they should be in the, right? So it says labs.wpi.edu/IMPHSS. Okay. And and then one last thing. This is just a fun thing. Has anyone ever played with gapminder.org? So I thought I'm just throwing it up here because I'm abusing my moderator's time. But visualizing and interpreting data, it's just a really fun way to play with, what happened to all the slides here? I can see nothing on wow. Is there so right now I'm not seeing anything on my laptop here. But on gapminder.org, you see videos of these small bubbles moving along. It's basically 3 or 4 dimensions representing data with 3 or 4 attributes, including time. And I think it's a good way to introduce students to playing with data, understanding data, representing data. So thank you very much. I have totally abused my moderator's time to do this. No, there should be. Yeah, you can. No, but you can just get out of here. Yeah. Sure. And then here we go.
Yeah, so I'd like to pick up on some of the comments and discussion that we had a little bit earlier. As I said, my name is Nick Horton. I'm a statistician, but with a real interest in ensuring that the mathematics and statistics are really a part of the kind of growth we're seeing in data science. There's a quote from my colleague from Mount Holyoke College, George Cobb, who's had a lot of involvement in a lot of national efforts, where he says, he believes it's the use of imagination and judgment that makes our subject, broadly speaking, mathematics and statistics, appealing. And we owe it to our students not to keep that a secret. I think this theme we have here of kind of modeling of teamwork, of problem solving is what mathematics does at its best. And I think that's what George said a long time ago. More recently, I chaired the American Statistical Association's Undergraduate Guidelines for Statistics Programs group. As part of that report, we had a statement that we are concerned that many of our graduates from these statistics programs didn't have the sufficient skills to be effective in the modern workforce. Thomas Lumley from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, said that our students know how to deal as n goes to infinity, but they can't deal with 1 million observations. And I think that reality of the fact that in the real world, data don't appear at the back of the book as a CSV file is a kind of a very true comment. Much more aspirationally and positive, Diane Lambert of Google has elegantly described kind of statistics and data science as the science of learning from data. And our students really then need to be able to think with data to be effective in the workforce. And that really has been an organizing principle for a lot of the work that's been happening over these years. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the changes that I've been seeing at the K-12 level. Roxy Peck at the Joint Statistics meetings 8 years ago noted that kind of with the Common Core or other kind of curriculum that are moving forward, that there's a lot more statistics that's showing up, even in the states that are adopting something else besides Common Core and maybe downplaying it to some extent. But there's really been a lot more emphasis on statistics, that it's not just AP statistics anymore. Many students are seeing in that Algebra 1 course a considerable amount of data visualization and informal inference. There's that gap of a year to do geometry, and then coming back to that Algebra 2 course, starting to see resampling as a way of bringing in inferential aspects of sampling distributions that are now showing up for all students. And so what formerly used to be part of AP statistics for a very small chunk of the students is now showing up more broadly. And I think that gives us the opportunity to start to build in some new ways and in some of the approaches that I've been describing through the Gaze report. But again, this challenge of, we can't teach multivariate thinking with calculators is, I think, really critical. We need to kind of be able to bring in some of these other tools, and there are approaches, I'll talk about some other ones like CODAP, that are really kind of allowing people to be thinking about both modeling and statistics in a open source, online way, bring your own browser, Chromebook happy, tablet happy kind of approach that can let us move beyond to kind of start to think about how we get students to meet these capacities. A big shift, and I was thinking about this a little bit during the Q&A session. It's like, how do we think outside the box? Well, there's one example for it, is the Advanced Placement Computer Science Principles course. And if there's APCS over here, the APCS Principles course couldn't be more different from it. One, it didn't exist in a university when it came out. That's never been something the College Board has done. So they created a course and said, hey, this is kind of a cool thing which maybe universities will adopt, and they are. And what is it focused on? Well, one of the big ideas, there's multiple big ideas in this course, is data and information. Talking about the role that computing enables and empowers new methods of information processing, driving monumental change. There's a lot of flowering language there, but managing and interpreting an overwhelming amount of raw data is part of the foundation of our information society and economy, and the use of computers, computation, and computer science as ways of understanding data and information, understanding the world around us. This course is kind of a very interesting mix. Set up, the exam at the end of the year is multiple choice, but there's some pretty good multiple choice questions. And then students actually submit 2 artifacts. They're actually developing portfolio-worthy things as projects. That's what gets assessed as part of the assessment for it. And again, I think this is now kind of looking at the kind of approaches and curricula that I think are pretty exciting that we need to be looking at pretty effectively. They talk about it as the new literacy. That's what the computer scientists are thinking. This kind of really comes together with writing and mathematics, and then this other aspect of making sense of data. The idea of kind of really thinking about a representation. We talked a little bit about, we heard a little bit of that, the question of diversity and inclusion. The students taking this exam look completely different from the APCS, which is very much in richer districts, is where there's been large numbers. It's mostly been a white, mostly male population. The curriculum and teacher development efforts have really made the APCS principles much more diverse. It was the largest ever first-year AP exam. There were 83,000. I expect it's going to be up to 120 this year because of these efforts behind it. And I think it's a really interesting model that's very much outside the box. It was not something, and that's something I'm hoping we can start to think about some ideas that could be statewide initiatives that could take off in other kind of ways. If we look at the kind of these principles, they now have these enduring understandings and learning objectives. But the learning objectives, again, this is just one of these big ideas, is to find patterns and test hypotheses about digitally processed information to gain insight and knowledge. As I said, much of the interesting part of AP statistics is included in this course that's growing like wildfire. So what's happening at the college level, kind of moving from that kind of transition point? As I talked earlier about the revised Gaze College Report and the role of multivariate thinking. What's really exciting, and I think we're seeing this both on the computer science side, in the science side, and in the mathematical sciences, is that the open source tools, what used to be licensed commercial software to do interesting things, the type of projects that Suzanne talked about earlier, now are accessible using professional grade tools that have gotten easier to use. And that combination has just been really powerful. The idea of simplified interfaces that let us think about a small set of learning outcomes. The prime paper was really thinking about developing modeling approach that builds on the Common Core state standards for modeling. The widespread adoption now of cloud computing, most of the institutions out there, certainly at the higher ed, two-year colleges and like, are running course management systems and the like on these same servers that are now gotten dramatically cheaper. To be able to bring computing, kind of decrease the barrier of who has a fast laptop or one that can maintain a charge, becomes much easier in a world where things are done in cloud computing. And the whole data science approach is you don't do computing on your desktop. You're doing that in some kind of cloud-based, certainly when we start to get to scale. There's also a lot of growth at the two-year colleges, and I just wanted to spend a minute or two talking about that. The NSF funded a gathering of two-year college data science faculty, again, folks coming from computer science, mathematics, statistics, and other areas. The report's now available. It's available in the background resources for this panel. That really we're focusing on the development of three things: certificate programs, associates to workforce, and associates to transfer. And what's been remarkable to me is that I have not found a community college recently that has not been developing data science programs. These are schools that typically teach, a whole series of math courses, including Calc 1, Calc 2, 3, linear algebra. They'll often teach CS 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they're all typically, historically, have just taught intro stat. But now there's kind of the development of these data science programs, and they've been taken off like wildfire. And so kind of different aspects of kind of what you would think about at a certificate program for someone maybe with a BA or some other prior training, associates to workforce, what that looks like. And again, we have great models for CS associates programs, cybersecurity CS programs, and those I think are very useful when we think of data technologists coming out of that, as well as associates to transfer. Same kind of general areas, again, very consistent with what Suzanne talked about and also came out of the National Academies Report, except these aspects of kind of the data management, data technologies. Where do students understand about relations and entities? There is a framework that the computer scientists have for data technologies that's not something we've typically been trained in, but we need to actually now incorporate into these programs. And so kind of really figuring out how that's happening. And as I said, it's happening very fast at the two-year colleges. There are various workforce implications from some of the reports that I mentioned earlier. I talked about this idea we need to get four-year and two-year colleges, leaders together and lock them into a room to make sure the articulation works, because that's highly problematic. And we now have new courses coming in, so it's a mess right there right now as it's all being developed. There's also, we need to kind of really be sure this aspect of diversity inclusion. How can we kind of attract and retain and really allow people to succeed, both for a variety of careers and have the students coming out of these programs mirror the country as a whole. The two-year college summit talked about the idea that we need to make sure that for programs going directly to the workforce, they have to have flexibility, but they need to have this collaboration with local industry partners to make those successful. I want to kind of step back just a little bit to this idea of what do we want them to do at the end of the day, right? When we want them to be able to come at the beginning of the day and figure out some question, import data, do some tidying or wrangling, and then multiple times through this process of transforming, visualizing, and modeling data. They need to kind of extract this understanding. They need to come up with workflows that will make that reproducible and automatable, and then they have to communicate the results. And this is actually straight from what we've been talking about earlier, the Common Core state standards for modeling, the way that Eureka Math has put those together, has this idea, there's a problem on the left-hand side, there's communication, there's a report on the right-hand side. This is kind of the things we are doing already, but it gets lost at times. And I think in terms of workforce part, this focus on modeling to me is an exciting approach. Hadley Wickham, who was responsible for that earlier figure, gave a talk last year at the Use R meetings, where he kind of posed the question, should all statistics students be programmers? Again, consistent with what Suzanne said, no, but they all need to program. And this aspect of what is actually often a dirty word, programming or scripting, but to kind of be thinking about these aspects of data technologies, algorithmic thinking is really as fundamental to me as some of the other things we've been talking about. So kind of closing other thoughts. For me, when I teach intrastat, it's kind of like multiple regression, early and often, purely descriptively. Start to kind of think about what it looks like if you have a different slope for the males and the females. Thinking about ways of bringing technology in, but to really do that in a way that reduces the cognitive load. Bring in these other aspects. What's the biggest problem with data science in my mind? It's selection bias and confounding, right? The data weren't collected for a particular reason. We can get the wrong answer unless we're careful. There needs to be that framework there. We've heard a lot already about project-based learning as a way of teaching, this idea of reproducible workflows that they can go out there and work in teams when they proceed. How do we do it? Certainly we want to de-emphasize p-values to make room for these other aspects, and there's a whole kind of other talk about that. And then thinking about multiple mathematical pathways that will provide the kind of training. That list of courses that Suzanne is exactly what I want students to have, but they don't have time in most programs to take whatever the 10 or 11 courses would be required. So again, that's my remarks. So thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Oh, lucky me. Okay. All right, we don't need to edit, but we would like to see. Where is it, y'all? Slideshow, thank you. Slideshow from the beginning. All right. Woo! All right, hi. I don't know where to stand. Once again. All right, maybe. All right, we'll try it. I'm Ray. I can't see some of you. It's going to really bug me. All right. So I usually talk about math modeling from kindergarten to industry, and I'm the third author on a new book chapter that hopefully will come out with Springer on math modeling in kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher is the first author. So, but I have done industrial work at all levels with my fifth graders up through college students, through graduate students, and I've worked in industry myself, and now I have a job that's not in what maybe you would call industry, but is in the nonprofit sector. So that's where I'm coming from today. And I think that what I want to talk to you about is sort of what is your work going to be tomorrow, and maybe some today as well, to really put this into action, because it's a tall order, what you just heard. So let me ask you, what skills, if you were to talk to employers, what skills do you think they're asking for? Just shout out some things. Communication, problem solving, critical thinking, computational number sense, being able to work independently and in a team, unscripted problems. Okay, perseverance, lots of things. How do we, as you were talking about, if someone says Common Core is evil, how do we come back with Common Core is a big step forward in getting students to justify what they're doing and to give them some flexibility about how they do what they do, so that when they get to their jobs, they not only can choose to do sensible things, but they can explain to their boss why they did them. Does that make sense? That is what, in my mind, that is the biggest thing that Common Core gave us, were those practices the list of practices align far better with those things you just said than any set of mathematics topics that you're going to come up with. And so if someone says Common Core is evil, you can ask them, what do employers want? And they will say those things, no matter who you ask. And then you can explain to look at the practices, and you can show a one-to-one correspondence between those practices and those things, right, that the employers want. So that's one answer to an approach to talking about, you know, like Common Core or not, it's moving you in the direction of having students explain and justify their mathematics. And that is what you will have to have in the workplace, no matter what you're making an argument for, even when you're making an argument for a raise. Right? Okay. So they want lots of things. You just said them. Right? Amongst, you know, these things are amongst them. And so I could have asked any audience, and you would have come up with those ideas. So here's what we hear. I have a student I just hired. If I give them a bare bones math problem and any resources, and if they can Google it, they can do the math problem. But when I give them a problem, and when you looked at those problems that Susie posed, those two problems, those were not story problems. You know story problems, they have all the information you need in order to solve the problem. If you looked at Susie's problems, those did not have any of the information you need. You didn't even know at that point which information was going to work for you. And you don't even know if the information you find, the data, will have been gathered for the purpose that you think you're going to use it for when you're solving that problem. Looks like the right data, but did you get to gather it? Do you really trust it? How did it get cleaned? Do you have to clean it? What choices are you going to make? What's an outlier? So the problem is students are coming to work with mathematics in their pockets. But given a problem, they have no clue which tool to pull out of the pocket at what time. And if they do pull out a mathematical tool, they don't know how to justify the choice of that tool as opposed to some other tool. Because the way our curriculum is set up is to ask them to do the same thing in the chapter that we explained in the chapter. And that's uniquely, not maybe uniquely American, but it's more American than in some other countries where things are mixed up a little bit more. Okay, and it makes it harder in that transition that Dan was talking about where the students are going on strike because they don't like the math. It's easier if someone tells you how to do the problem and then asks you to do that kind of problem. Even like the easy, middle, and hard ones. Even the hard ones, you still know which tool you're pulling out of your pocket. Right? And so when you're thinking about your curriculum choices, this is really important. Okay, so I wrote this book with a couple of other people to try to answer the question, for faculty members, how do you advise your students how to get a job, no matter what job it is, when they're coming out with quantitative training? Our faculty didn't work in industry generally. So they're not awesome advisors. And I hope that high school guidance counselors will start having this on their shelf as well. Because it's not just, oh, you like math, you can be a blah. There's a lot more to be done, but then how do you communicate it? Because your job is not going to have the title mathematician. You love math, but once you step into industry, that's not going to be your job title. And if it is, you're going to be at the bottom of the pay scale for your qualifications. Get that. So we have not only a problem in mathematics about PR for our profession, but literally, if we don't rebrand ourselves, we get paid less. Yikes. Okay? So we need to help students make this transition to talk about what they do. People need to be able to tell stories, and the projects that you're hearing about provide students with wonderful things to talk about in interviews for any job about how they solved a problem and what tools they brought to bear, how they chose those tools, and whether or not those tools worked, and when they failed, how they realign what they were doing. All right, so here's your challenge. This stuff, like Dan said, takes time, and it's great because it is the marathon runners that are going to succeed here. Right? It is the ones that persist. And as Uri said, if you're willing to take the same course 3 times and try to pass it, you have the persistence, right? So it's not just the students who are getting things quickly and easily who are going to be able to deal with the frustrations that you have to engage with real problems. And I mentioned this previously, that I'm really thinking about this thing Uri said, and what's your job, and what's my job, and how do we work together to create the support structures so that people feel like it's part of their job to do this, and not extra. All right, so here's a typical modeling challenge. I want you to do this with the person next to you. I gotta go home at 6:45. When should I leave to go to the airport? Go.
Google data. I would Google and see what it says. I'd like to get there. What time do you want to get there? 5:15?
5:45.
Okay, stop.
Really?
Stop. Stop. Anybody got any questions for me? Oh, really? What? Am I checking any luggage? What else? Do I have TSA pre-check? And which airport am I going to? Oh, really? Well, you guys all started and nobody raised their hands. Okay, so what is the point I'm trying to make? Students are accustomed to be given math problems where when you say go, they actually can go. And mathematicians are very accustomed, even with modeling problems, to go in the corner, make their own assumptions, and come up with a beautiful solution that doesn't work at all for the client. Because you cannot start a modeling problem without knowing the context of that problem. And I would argue that your most important question to have asked me is, how risk averse am I? I love airports. And I would be happily 2 hours early rather than only 10 minutes early. So you gotta know that about me. Does that make sense? So anyway, that's my point. All right, so context matters. Don't forget your client. You can't just, so community problems are important because you get into your community and talk to people. All right, how many minutes do I have?
Oh, keep going. Go on.
All right, keep going. All right. Does this make sense? And this is why it connects people with each other and with mathematics. So I have elementary school teachers I work with who quit algebra because they went to a college where they didn't have to have Algebra 1, and they became a reading specialist, but now they're a 4th grade teacher. And they are reconnecting with math, and they send me texts about how much they love math. It is reconnecting our teachers as well with their communities and with math. And nobody's going to be handed a word problem on a job that looks like they are in the books, but they will be handed things that are sort of like the scenarios that you saw in words, right? But they won't be in words. It'll be your boss being like, oh my God, we have to solve this problem. What are we going to do? All right, so, and it's not a math modeling problem if you don't solve it with math or stats, mathematical sciences, all your mathematics tools, your operations research. If you solve it by not talking to me and just putting it into Google, that was not a it was somebody's math modeling problem, but it wasn't yours. So we have to be careful to help teachers understand how to engage the mathematics concepts that we want students to hit while they're doing these problems, and that is another huge challenge. Okay, so the challenge is to balance the time. So some days when I'm teaching differential equations and I'm teaching modeling, I say, today is the day you use this tool, and I don't care which problem you solve. So I usually let them choose the problem, but this is the tool you have to use. So pick a problem where you think this tool is going to work, and today is this tool day. And there's other days that everybody's working on the same problem and we're applying different tools, and you get to choose the tool. Does that make sense? And so balancing those things, but so that choice is a part of what you do when you do math is incredibly important. All right, so this is your challenge. Assessment, I actually think, isn't as big a problem as you might think, because we have modeling competitions that are assessing problems from tens of thousands of students. And there's incredible resources online about how to teach modeling, how to coach modeling, how to think about modeling, how to use computing resources in modeling, how to visualize data. We've written books. They're free. They're online. We have resources up and videos. So Uri's comment that the PD takes time, but it's not actually the problem. It's the structures to support the people to do it that are. Okay, so how can you find problems? I like to go around to businesses and ask, what's your biggest problem? So I'm going to close with a video. I was in Montana, and I went to my hotel, and the people at the hotel, these women, 2 women, said, what are you here for? Oh, I'm going to do modeling. Oh, we hate math. We're scared of math. We don't do math. We don't do anything with math. We've heard of Common Core. It's really scary. We totally can't do it. I can't believe you're here to do that. Oh, my God. I was like, okay, well, you're a new hotel. What's your biggest problem? And they were like, okay, I have 30 seconds, but I'm still going to play you this video. Maybe. Come on, baby. I saw it. Oops. Help. I did see the thing that lets you play the video. Okay, I'm going to go back this way. But I'm going to, oh, please play. I might have to do like,
Wait, no, what did you just say?
I said that the carafes hold 10 mugs per carafe. So
Oh, okay, so maybe we need to go over here and look at the carafe.
Well,
Oh.
and the other problem is that a lot of people use these takeout cups, and we haven't figured that out. And I think there's 2 mugs to every takeout cup. So we have a mixture of mugs and cups, and it's just
The mugs are bigger or the cups are bigger?
The cups are bigger.
The cups are bigger.
And
Oh,
then-
okay, can you show me your coffee cart?
And then some people come in here with their own mug, those travel mugs, and the
she's
next
the
thing
one
you
that
know,
was
this
most
thing's
scared of
empty.
math.
And so we've miscalculated.
Awesome. Oh, so
It
coffee
depends how
is
much
a,
cream they put in it too, because
yes, it does. It absolutely does. Thank you.
all right, that is like 30 seconds after she told me she doesn't do math. Do you understand what I'm saying? It didn't take long to reconnect her with mathematics. And then I said, oh, well, if I brought a bunch of elementary school students in to solve your problem, would that be okay? And they said, only if we get to help. Okay, so my feeling is even though we have a PR problem, it just doesn't, people don't want to be disconnected from mathematics. It's actually a feeling of shame. And I think that we can easily reduce math shame by having these kinds of conversations. And if every high school student was speaking to every business that they interact with and asking what's your biggest problem, and then going away and asking the question, what math tools could I use to solve that problem? Or every class goes out with a particular tool and says, how could I use this tool to solve a problem in my community? That would be a different population. So this is part of my story as well, because I felt very disconnected from math. I didn't think I was PhD material. Other faculty members agreed with me. But I had a professor who took us to NASA for a practicum in operations research, and I taught school for 10 years, and I kept thinking, I just want to learn more math, and I think I can, because I contributed to the International Space Station. And I was part of that team, and that's why I went back to school in math to get a PhD, and succeeded, and got a master's and a PhD in 4 years. Now, I was not considered PhD material. But I was older and slightly wiser and maybe very focused because I had 2 children at the time. Okay, so I hope you'll think about this, how to make time and space, and then how to create these support structures. And I would be happily thinking about it with you. We've talked about the game report. I look forward to addressing your further questions. Thanks.
So I can ask a question, or I can throw it open to questions. Do you guys have tons of, who has a question? One, okay. But let me ask one quick question. Actually, Janita, you want to join us on our panel?
Yeah, why don't you? You might want to ask Janitha a question, actually. So here's somebody from industry.
So what,
And
I'm gonna ask,
actually in HR,
In HR.
So-
Yeah.
I know all about hiring.
so actually, I think I will do what I'm supposed to do. I have a question I need to ask.
Okay.
So to the panelists, so one quick question, so then we can move on to the open questions. If you had your druthers, okay, that's an American word. If you had your druthers, what would you have students do, let's say in their last 2 years of high school? And if you feel you've already addressed that, just say pass. Or Janitha, you want to say?
I would say have them visit places they think they want to work and places they think they don't want to work to see what it's really like. I think even in places that having people come and talk to them about what their job is and what they really do, I mean, they do that. Like my son is 7 and the fireman comes and he comes home and he really wants to be a fireman and he's all pumped up about it. And I think that the high school has gotten away from that, or the career day is a little too specific. So I think students get this idea of this is a job I want and this is a job I don't want, and I would push them to visit some of these places and see what it's really like to have a job like that.
I really like that idea of kind of, updating and broadening the career day. What's, I think, a big challenge in many of the data science jobs mentioned in that McKinsey report, which I think gets us to now, right? It's 2019 was there, and I think they were right. Those jobs do, there's a need for those. But they're often in much smaller companies. It's not just the Googles and the Facebooks. There are a lot of smaller businesses and small businesses where you're actually seeing the growth of these positions. So the analyst type positions from maybe 5 or 6 years ago that Rahcel was talking about, or maybe they're data scientists now, are often in nonprofits, municipalities, other kinds of places where they need to be able to kind of, make sense of what's going on there. And it's a lot harder to kind of make those connections. But I'd like to kind of see that, as well as, again, the modeling stuff tends to drop off in the Common Core. Ted Coe's work on this has shown some of those, issues we have with where the modeling goes, because it's not as structured into that later part of the curriculum.
So we have a special acronym since it's called FANG with 2 A's. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. The FANG companies, that's, and that's, someone said, what's your biggest problem? And it's competing against the FANG. So.
I'd have them do a community-based problem or an internship in their last 2 years, because the point of keeping me connected to math was that I felt like there was a piece of me in that International Space Station. But the most important thing I learned was that the data that Cleveland needed, that Houston had, they couldn't get, even though they were both NASA, because they compete for contracts. And that was just fascinating to me. And it has really stuck with me that sometimes there are these structural impediments in organizations that they make sense in some ways, but not in others, and everybody just decides to live with them. That was a huge life lesson for me that really stuck with me. And I think, and also learning, like who's important, or who is contributing in different kinds of ways in an organization, because my parents both had the same kind of job, and I couldn't imagine any other kind of job. You know about the jobs your parents have and your friends' parents have, and all the others are sort of imaginary, fictitious things.
Good, so questions. So there's.
Well, I want to hear Janitha's, FANG is your biggest problem.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm from California. One of the initiatives we have is actually linked learning, where we connect high school curriculum and high school students to the industry. But oftentimes when we have that communication, how would I say this delicately? It's the teachers and the educators always hijack the conversation, and then the industry partners are left just agreeing to it and not being really involved as a partner. So I'm trying to say is, how do you remedy that situation, that the industry partners are also empowered, that they have something to bring into the conversation,
more of you. 'Cause
We're trying to build it into our we have departmental review documents that we use to guide college departments on looking at curriculum, and we're trying to build in the suggestion that they have industry representatives on those review teams, which isn't a common practice, except at a very few places. And so it would be interesting to think about ways to bring industry partners in to meetings like this and other kinds of places that you're discussing curriculum. You know, I'm glad to see that we have someone from IBM at the table. I'm glad we have Janitha here to enter the conversation, and we should keep doing that. And remember, just like we're talking about who's not at the table, you always got to look around and think about who's not here as well as who is here.
So we have advisory boards, so at the university at least, which anybody can have an advisory board, and that often includes not just other faculty, but people from industry, alumni and all these sorts of things. The dean has an advisory board, the department has an advisory board. So I guess, as Rachel said, just getting people in a position where their voice can be heard, but that's one mechanism. Are we getting to your question? Okay, good. And so
But that was also sort of the point of the exercise that I just gave you, right? Which is also how not to forget the client.
So you had a question?
Yes, I wanted to sort of talk about the reciprocity between industry and education. There has been, I'm from Maryland, there has been a lot of conversation already about messaging about math and about public relations about math. But it seems to me that industry and education should be partners, as the gentleman over there talked about. But there needs to be a way that industry lifts up education and doesn't just say, we're not getting the people we need, we don't have. Also, industry needs to fit, I think, I'm not in industry, I'm in education, needs to advocate for education and advocate for people to be teachers, because that is their pathway. So I'm wondering, so in the conversation about industry and math, how do we bring them in as champions of the work?
I think one of the big developments at the two-year college level and the places, like Montgomery College in Maryland and some other places, the places that have been able to kind of have that strong industry advisory board have been really great kind of getting things started. But again, we're talking Cary, North Carolina. We're talking Kansas City that had Hallmark, who said, sure, we'll fund your advisory board. Sure, we'll give you 10 faculty to teach the program for the first 3 years. I think the challenge of kind of scaling these industry connections out at the university and two-year college level to less resourced areas that don't have such a rich base of a kind of a direct thing. And the question was really on the K-12 side. I think it's even more difficult. So how do we think about what those structures look like? Because those are going to be win-win-wins in the way you describe them. But where's the time coming from? Where's the leadership coming from those levels? And again, this is where maybe the state teams can think about ways of kind of pulling some of that together, because the potential benefit for everyone is going to be huge, but again, I'm sympathetic because I know how hard it is at the university level. The roundtable on data science education was focused on industry partnerships this last meeting, and the notes from that will soon be available. And it was interesting to see what Stanford is doing in computer science and what CMU is doing. But this question of how it scales down to a broader set of institutions and really, reflects the diversity of the country is major work in progress.
And I also think I don't yet understand how to get company representatives to see it as their responsibility to listen. Because I definitely, at least, in some of the roundtable conversations, saw both a willingness to say what they need, like you said, but also to say, well, if someone wants to come work for us instead of teaching, good for us. And so that's tricky also. So I think there are some hard conversations about how we can help them feel, I don't know if obligated is the right word, but my hope sometimes is to get these students in, because if I want Facebook to bring a food truck to an event, I can't call. But I can call the student who they just recruited. I can call the student who just did an internship with them. I have to call their talent. And their talent can call anybody, and there is a truck there tomorrow. Does that make sense? And so I think in K-12, we also have to think, where are our students going, and then how do we keep touch with them and get them to re-advocate for their home institutions? There's a stronger internship component in Europe, and I've spent a lot of time in Korea, and I think there's a lot of trying to actually model after the program that Susie described. So I think there's some of both. I think we are leaders in some ways educationally with these kinds, I think, but there's also places with internship mechanisms in Canada also that the government puts tremendous amount of money into supporting students getting into internships, and we don't have those mechanisms with our government right now.
So I'm also familiar with Germany. I've done a lot of work there, and there's just the number of academic jobs is very small. So it's to their benefit to train everyone to be ready for jobs. And they start tracking early on, like, is this going to be what kind of career, and prepare people much earlier. And I know even students that I've worked with from Germany say, okay, well, I'm going to go to a bank now because that's the place that I can work. There's not an academic job. If something opens in another country, then they might go. But I know that there's a lot, because of the state of the workforce in Europe, it's quite different, the way people are prepared.
Okay, so I'm gonna, you have your hand up, you want to make a comment or a question?
A question.
Good,
Yeah.
please.
So a lot of times as states, they run into state staff, teachers, all the way down to the classroom level, run into a perception among parents sometimes that is, college is not for my kid. And I'm just curious, what underlying assumptions might you have brought to your presentations around post-secondary credential earning or degree earning as it relates to industry participation?
I'd love to start. For data science, it was always these like unicorns, PhDs in astronomy, who are really good with duct tape and billions of data points or terabytes of data. And those are the kind of the jobs people were describing. But when you looked at what was actually happening at the FANG or the kind of medium-sized places, it really is a pyramid of PhDs. There's a small number of those, a lot more masters, tremendous number of bachelors, and now this need at the associate's level. And to kind of be thinking about what that, I don't know if it's data technologist, data plumber, but to be able to kind of visualize and make sense of data in a way, because the places they're going to be working can't afford a master's or a PhD, even if they could hire them. And so this kind of challenge of thinking about a kind of much more diverse pyramid where it's much more porous, I think is going to be an important part of that conversation, but certainly not the only part of it.
Mm-hmm. Good. Question?
So in the K-12 space, I think one of the biggest structures that opposes what we're talking about here is standardized assessment and accountability. And every time I go, I'm from Indiana, but anytime I'm going to talk to teachers about changing their teaching practices, that's the biggest pushback is this is not how we're assessed, and this is not how we're held accountable. In Indiana, it's now our pay is tied to how our kids are doing on these assessments. I'm wondering if there's a way to promote, at the same time in Indiana, there's a lot of support for workforce development and that landscape. I'm wondering if there's a way to leverage workforce partners to say, hey, listen to this kind of accountability is not actually supporting what we need you guys to be doing, and what that might look like.
I have a question for you all about that. Does anybody have portfolio-based assessments, and how does that start happening?
So we don't. I don't know.
Does anybody have portfolio-based assessments?
Ohio is starting that direction.
So are we again back at the question of you know, I keep saying advisory board, I said advisory board, but is there room for that? Is there a place for that at the school level to have, so you're gonna address that, to have industry engaged at that ground level almost?
Well, before, I guess, to me, it's more at the legislative level.
Yep, mm-hmm,
Than it is even at the school level.
yep.
Because right now, the teachers are just responding to the message that they're hearing. And as much as we try to say, hey, it's standards-based instruction, and if you're doing this and you're teaching kids how to think, they're gonna be able to do these other things, there's a real fear, and there's a real, there's a real hesitancy, because if I've been getting, 60% over the hump this way, like, what happens if I switch that, right? And so I guess I'm just wondering, I think it's a higher level in terms of how do we advocate, like, it's gotta be a both and in terms of, you need the workforce development, so we have to have this conversation about assessment of that.
Okay, so, did you want to respond to that? Your hand shot up.
So I just to comment about the advisory.
Yeah,
board
maybe
and
it's-
the space
Mhm.
to potentially get some traction. It doesn't really address the very real issue of accountability for assessment, but CTE is a space where we've had some traction because there's career technical education. It receives a lot of additional funding, federal funding streams, and I'm from Oregon, and we just passed a measure that also increased funding streams for career technical education. And they have written into their requirements advisory boards. And in Oregon, where we're really rural, that can't happen by school or by teachers, so we create regional advisory boards. And we've seen a lot of success in industry coming to the table, I think mainly because they have to in order for this funding to come through. But there is a sense of reciprocity in, at least locally, because they have a real need. We have 400 unfilled computer science jobs in a really small town in Oregon. And they need folks to have, one computer science program in a county that's the size of Connecticut. So there was a real need there, and so they came to the table and asked me, what can we do to help? And so things like advocating for funding and advice on curriculum, and now I'm going to add advocating for assessment changes to that list have actually happened.
Did anyone of the panelists want to?
So I want to say this is an awesome math modeling program question, which is how do you assess the success?
Yeah.
That's like one of the number one things I do in my own job. How do you figure out how do we assess different programs for employees? If you can get someone to work on that and start to have an example, I find that that's the most influential way to show a leader that, look, Ohio is doing this. And Ohio and Indiana are, the Indiana governor doesn't want to be less than the Ohio governor. If you can add this level of competition to it and show, look, here's the data showing this is what they did, here's what we're doing, this is how it's working. I think that those are really good first steps to trying to get people to think differently.
After the last panel, we were talking about how CBMS could serve as an organization that decides these are the 5 metrics that we're working towards collectively. And again, you could help us say what they are. But if, for example, portfolio-based assessment is something concrete that would help move things in this direction, whatever this direction is the most, then we could, for example, on all of our CBMS things, have a little temperature thermometer or whatever to say how many states have portfolio-based assessment. And we could be like, look, just 2. Oh, look, now it's 3, now it's 10. And that we collectively decide that success looks like that. And I'm not saying that's the thing, but I hope that out of this, you all tell us, how you need us to support your work.
So, Padru, and then Diane, and then we'll move on.
Thank you for those comments, and I just wanted to piggyback on the computer science aspect of it. So, workforce, of course, is a big word, big jazzy word is computational thinking. And it turns out, of course, we all as mathematicians and mathematics educators can contribute to, that concept where it is not just touching on data practices, everything from data
Thank you. Diane?
I just want to highlight the importance of using assessment as a lever for change. The idea of portfolio assessment, we actually have quite a bit of work on that we did in the 90s, early 2000s, before No Child Left Behind. That's not to say you can't implement it locally. As a starting point, however, I would ask you to think about to what extent your state assessments or local assessments even have high-quality performance assessment items. One of the very big disappointments in the reauthorization of ESEA, the Every Child Succeeds Act, is it does not it requires states to assess all of their standards. It does not require performance assessments. And I've been very concerned about the number of states wanting to use ready-made college assessments like SAT and ACT as their high school assessment because there are no performance assessments on it. We have a lot of information. We know a lot about how to design high-quality performance assessments. And that is a real lever. If we started there, even before thinking about portfolios, how do we ensure we have items that assess problem solving? If we can't assess mathematical modeling, as described in GAME completely, we can have items that attest assumptions. So that's a really important thing to look at, both in terms of state assessments, but also for those of you in districts on district level assessments, where you can put it into your local program first. So I just encourage you to look at that as an important starting place.
Thank you very much. So other questions? Any other questions?
I was just going to comment with where we're at with Ohio, what we're trying to do is, right now we have what's called a capstone that can actually be a substitute for our state assessments for mathematics and English language arts specifically, but moving into a culminating, possibly with a 4-year project of a culminating experience. The biggest questions that we're getting are, a lot of them from industry and from the business area, can you guarantee that it's going to be of the same rigor and experiences that are going to be meaningful to these students because of we have a lot of this will be done at the local level. We have 600 and some districts plus community schools and everything else. The other aspect is that they want to see what does this look like. So trying to find good examples that represent how they can do this and show that they really have an understanding of, and three of the key areas are mathematics, high school English language arts, and technology, and how those integrate into, and they have to be able to represent that within that project. So having good examples of that. And so, we look to other areas as well, but we're realizing, kind of on the forefront of some of this because it is very, it's different, but we know that there's examples out there, so we are going to look for those.
That word rigor is tricky, right?
What's that?
That word rigor
Yes,
is
it is.
tricky.
Yes,
And
it is.
I think that's something that you also can think about is how we redefine rigor and how we define rich, right? So,
Because a lot of people think of rigor as an assessment that measures a certain way.
what are you counting? Yeah, so we have been doing some writing on rigor in math modeling and how to help people make the translation from what they think of as rigor to what it would look like in a math modeling context.
Okay.
So I'm curious, I love this discussion, and I really believe high school and college students can really make a huge difference between businesses if you engage and if you describe. But let's talk about the traditional path, algebra 2, calculus, what we all know and love, and frankly what universities I think still value in terms of admissions requirements. So it seems like there may be a very big dissonance between what you're talking about and what actually goes on in most, especially suburban schools, which are channeling their students to a path that is very, very different from what you're describing. So I'm curious, in terms of the higher ed context, how we, which really in many ways is a big gorillas in the room on math or anything else, how do they engage?
Sorry, I just lost the last sentence you said. Can you repeat what you just said before?
I'm saying I'm wondering how higher ed
Higher ed.
plays the role it plays in terms of what it's suggesting high school students should be doing in relation to the conversation you're having.
I'd be glad to take a kind of a stab at part of that. In Massachusetts, at least, to transfer into a computer science BS program from community college, one needs to have taken calculus. And the curriculum guidelines for computer science are a little bit vague on what the mathematical prerequisites are. They say if you're going to do human-community interaction, you should take a stats course. But otherwise, there's really only that calculus course, which in a positive note, I hope is kind of building the type of abstraction we were talking about that came up in your question. But I think for the most part, it's been a historical weed-out course, so the computer science departments aren't inundated by the numbers, because they're already inundated by numbers. And the impact that it's had on diversity and inclusion in computer science is really atrocious. You know, we had a situation back in the early 80s when there were a fair number of women receiving degrees in computer science, and that essentially kind of, ended, and it's only just starting to come back. And I think as we start to see the growth of data science and kind of really thinking about a kind of a more modeling-based mathematics, we need to really ensure that that is diverse and broad. And so we have the situation in CS where it's historical. That's been the course that's required. That's the easiest path. That's what people are. And we saw from David's presentation to start off today that people have to take multiple cracks at it till they finally give up. And I think we need to kind of be thinking very carefully about, we still want to have that calculus pathway, but we need other pathways. And I think for the most part, it used to be, I think, a kind of a mark on you if you took AP statistics as opposed to AP calculus, that you were looked upon less favorably. But I think that has changed a lot over the last 10 or 12 years. There's still some aspects of it, but we need to be kind of developing other pathways that allow student success, that will help them move into STEM, to get the skills that they need, and to kind of make sure that those are not thought of as developmental or kind of second-class citizens.
And I think the performance tasks that Diane was talking about rarely appear on the placement exams that you would get when you come into college to ask how good are you at math, how competent are you. And so when we're thinking about the assessment, we shouldn't only think K-12. We should think about Uri's data and David's data about how if you don't perform well in your assessment, you're going to be put in pre-calc because maybe you're a hotshot modeler, but you didn't, have a grip on some of those calculus or even mostly pre-calculus concepts that are showing up on those assessments at college. So we can do this cooperatively.
I just because the word
Diane has a follow-up.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to, go ahead.
I just wanted to remind people that there's a wealth of good performance items available. We have those developed by the Assessment Consortium, Harvard Smarter Balance. We have some from the Shell Center, the Balanced Assessment projects from years ago, so they're and the new standard reference exam. So there's lots of good examples ready to use with rubric samples of student work, et cetera. So if you're not aware of all that, we have a wealth of work in that area over the past 20 years.
All right. So I was just going to point out, just because the word calculus came up, right? And so, at least for us, calculus, WPI, maybe, I don't know, or different, but you can major in whatever you want to. You don't have to have performed a certain level to be at a certain major and all these sorts of things. And even for our math majors, calculus is not even required. It's not listed as a required course. They seem to always take it, which is good, because it's good recommended background, but technically it's not required. And the problem that I did spend a little bit more time, that one about the drone flying to different spots around the country looking at landslides, we did not take a single derivative, okay? So it's a graph theory kind of thing. Maybe there's some linear algebra involved, as it is in a lot of what goes on in data science. So just we continue to encourage you to recognize the different pathways, and calculus is not the be-all or end-all. And in saying that, I know that there is a system already set up in a certain way, but I think that's part of the goal of all these discussions, to broaden how we think, broaden the pathways, and maybe the goal is that we, the people here, are going to coalesce and be that force to break through the wall that currently exists. Yeah? Okay.
So let me add something too. I think we've talked a lot about how murky it is between high school and college, whatever type of college you select. I think it's equally murky between college and working, because I don't know any job where there's not some sort of a test given. Sometimes they can be totally different tests. Some are oral, you write on the board. Some are like take home. Some are, I mean, this is part of what we do in our interview process. Everyone takes some kind of a test. And the kind of test is not something that students who have just been on this traditional path that you talked about would recognize as a test. Because a lot of it is trying to aim at how do you think, how do you present your results, how do you interact with others, where do you look for information. Like, we want to learn a lot of other things besides what's more traditional education. So I think that some of the assessment and the way that high school assesses is one thing, college is totally different, and then the way employers assess is completely different. So that's kind of where all the mix-up comes in, so.
And let me just kind of make a quick linkage between what Rahcel was talking about in terms of some of those co-curricular things that are happening at the college level. The competitions, those other kind of opportunities to kind of be doing things in practice are often thought to be shallow in terms of real insights that you can do on a weekend or something like that. You don't have the domain knowledge, you don't have the ability oftentimes to go figure it, but it's great practice for those job interviews. And this aspect of, I think we're teaching problem solving, and to be able to kind of like frame it in that way, to me, is a very helpful answer, coming back to that original, the Common Core is evil, but I think it helps to foster problem solving, and that's what we want our students to do.
I saw your hand, Joel.
I'm curious if the type of assessment or tests from the industry perspective, are they cataloged somehow? I mean, from a K-12 perspective, I would love to be able to point at a variety of different examples.
No, we have to make them different every time, because as soon as someone takes one, it goes on the internet.
Yeah, there's websites.
Yes, there are.
Yeah, there's great websites where you can find kind of interview problems that people have been, coming up with.
One of the themes that I've heard in the discussion today that I don't think has been named, except Brian Roger said the word, which I actually found incredibly ironic, and I'll tell you why in a second, is what do we mean by rigor, right? Because as we talk about different pathways, as we talk even about what is an HR manager or director looking for in an applicant, I don't think rigor means the same thing now that certainly most of us grew up with, or even that we were talking about 5 or 10 years ago. So just a selfish plug for a second, the Dana Center has a paper out on rigor that is a joint statement between K-12 and higher ed on how to define rigor. Go to our website, blah, blah, blah. Right? The thing that I thought was so ironic in Brian's statement about a portfolio assessment, or I'm even just going to call it multiple measures, was a concern about rigor, and I didn't hear who it was coming from. I assume workforce or legislators, right? And yet, they're also the ones who are saying we're not getting enough qualified applicants, right? So I don't think you get to say both at the same time, right? I think you either have to say we're going to revise how we think about rigor, or God forbid, we're actually going to take on what we mean by college ready. I don't think it means the same thing anymore that it meant 10 years ago, right? We had a pretty good run at it with the Common Core. We did our best work. We thought we knew what it was, and we did at the time. And then just like that, the landscape shifted under us, and we have to come back and think anew about it with all the new information that we have, including what do we mean by rigor.
I'd like to add to that the workforce, this idea of being in the workforce and when you get into the workforce, I mean, a lot of us had jobs as kids, right? And then a lot of students are working in college, and a lot of students are working to be able to afford to go to college, and then they're working during college. So, and at least my undergraduates were feeling pretty burnt out after 4 years, and really, even the ones that wanted to go to grad school, a lot of times they wanted to work for a while, both to save money, pay off some loans, and also really be sure of what they wanted to do when they went to grad school. I think all that's great. And so I also think that having a new vision of learning isn't linear, careers aren't linear, and so the idea of multiple pathways plays in many ways here.
Thank you very much. I think we've come at the end of our time, so let's thank our
Thank you, Susie.
And I'd like to thank you for your engagement and questions and comments. And you won't have to see me anymore.
Thanks for jumping in. I look forward to your talk. That should be great.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. Well done. 2 in a row. That was
Yeah, you earned your pay for
Are we getting paid?
Thank you guys, but I wanted to share something with you. This is not about us being my computer stuff, but, there's also some pretty smelly ones.
No.
This is something that
Did it just by eyesight. That's how it is. You have to do it.